He was kicked out of the restaurant for his red Maga hat, without anyone asking who he was. The manager had no idea he was the new owner of the chain, but he would soon regret it. In the city center, among glistening shop windows, stands the restaurant The Gourmet, a place where the elite gather. The interior screams luxury: soft leather chairs, black marble tables, and a massive chandelier hanging from the ceiling like a sparkling waterfall. The music is subtle, classic jazz that enhances the refined atmosphere. The restaurant manager, Lucas Hansen, stands behind the counter, closely monitoring his staff. He wears a perfectly pressed black jacket and a pristine white shirt, with a silver watch gleaming on his wrist. Lucas is known for his meticulous approach to work. "Annie, make sure there's a fresh orchid on table 5, he says coldly to a waitress. The waitress nods and hurries to fulfill the instruction. Lucas surveys the guests, scrutinizing their appearance, behavior, and manners. At that moment, the restaurant doors swing open, and Mark Sampson enters. A man of about 50, he has a tall stature and a confident posture. His face is framed by slightly graying hair, and his gaze exudes calm and assurance. However, all attention is drawn to the red Maga hat on his head. As soon as he crosses the threshold, the room falls silent. Guests turn to stare and begin whispering. "Did you see that?" A woman in a diamond necklace murmurs, pointing at Mark. "He doesn't belong here," her companion adds. Mark seems oblivious to the stares. He calmly scans the restaurant, noting the empty tables, then walks toward the counter where Lucas stands. His footsteps echo loudly in the silence. "Good evening," Mark says evenly. "One table, please." Lucas looks up, his gaze quickly assessing the man, lingering on the hat. Its red color seems to scream the political stance of the wearer. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked," Lucas replies, not bothering to check the reservation book. Mark glances around. At least 5 tables are unoccupied. He looks back at Lucas. "What about those?" Lucas smirks, tilting his head slightly. "Those are for people who know how to behave. We don't serve people wearing symbols like that." A ripple of motion spreads through the room. Some guests chuckle. Others nod approvingly at Lucas's words. Mark frowns briefly, but then a gentle smile spreads across his face. He inclines his head slightly. "I see. Thank you for your honesty." Turning, he walks toward the exit at a steady pace, unfazed by the stares drilling into his back. As the door closes behind him, Lucas's loud laugh breaks the silence. "What nerve! Did you see him? Thinking they can buy respect with their ridiculous hats." The next day, the Gourmet is bustling with activity as preparations for lunch service are underway. Lucas, still energized by the previous night's events, issues commands with enthusiasm. "Did you see that Maga fanatic last night?" he asks loudly, addressing the staff near the counter. "He strutted in like he owned the place, then scurried out with his tail between his legs." "You kicked him out so confidently, Mr. Hansen." Annie giggles. "It was awesome." Lucas grins smugly. "Exactly. People like him don't belong in a place like this." His speech is interrupted when 3 individuals enter the restaurant. A stern man in a business suit, a woman with glasses holding a folder, and a distinguished man in a coat. They all exude authority. The man in the suit scans the room and asks loudly, "Who's in charge here?" Lucas's expression shifts. His confident smile becomes strained as he straightens up and approaches the group. "That would be me. How can I help you?" The man's gaze is cold. "The new owner of the restaurant would like to see you. Where is he?" "Owner?" Lucas stammers, his confidence faltering. "I thought—" The man doesn't wait for him to finish. He gestures toward the conference room. "This way." Lucas, attempting to mask his confusion, follows hesitantly. Opening the door to the conference room, he stops in his tracks. Seated at the table is Mark Sampson, now dressed in a sharp gray suit that complements his figure. The red Maga hat still sits prominently on his head. Beside him are 2 lawyers with stacks of papers. Lucas stares in disbelief. "You—" Mark looks up, his face calm and composed. He gives a slight nod. "Yes, me." After a pause, Mark adds with a faint smirk, As you said yesterday, we don't serve people wearing symbols like that. Shall we discuss that, Mr. Hansen? Lucas remains silent, his face turning ashen. Lucas stands nervously at the door to the conference room, feeling like he's on trial. His pride from the previous night has evaporated. Mark sits calmly, his gaze piercing. The lawyers quietly sort through papers, preparing for the conversation. Take a seat, Mr. Hansen, Mark says, gesturing to a chair across from him. Lucas sits down, his hands trembling slightly. I was just following the restaurant's policies, he begins, avoiding Mark's eyes. Mark frowns slightly, leaning forward and clasping his hands together. The restaurant's policies? Are you sure about that? He opens a folder, pulls out a document, and slides it across the table to Lucas. It's a new code of conduct signed just days earlier. In bold letters, it states, "Guests cannot be discriminated against based on political beliefs, appearance, or other personal attributes." Were you aware of this? Mark asks, his voice firm. Lucas stammers, struggling to find an excuse. I must have missed it in my copy, sir. Maybe I overlooked. Mark raises a hand, signaling him to stop. His gaze grows colder. Our legal department provided me with footage of your performance last night. One of the lawyers plays a video on a tablet. Lucas's voice is clear. We don't serve people wearing symbols like that. The video ends with laughter from both Lucas and some patrons. The lawyer then displays comments from social media, where the incident has gone viral. Lucas pales as he reads the backlash. This restaurant is an example of how not to run a business. Discrimination and arrogance, the perfect recipe for failure. Shameful behavior. Mark leans back in his chair, crossing his arms as he looks at Lucas. Your actions have damaged the restaurant's reputation. Do you believe this aligns with your responsibilities as a manager? Lucas tries to defend himself. I was just trying to protect the restaurant's atmosphere. People like him don't fit in here. Mark rises from his chair, walking around the table to stand behind Lucas. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he speaks softly but firmly. Lucas, I could fire you right now, but I believe people can change. Lucas looks at him, bewildered. Mark continues. You'll have the chance to prove you can respect every guest, in a different role. 2 weeks later, the restaurant reopened under a new name, the Gourmet for All. The facade of the establishment was now adorned with a bright sign, and on the doors was a message. We're happy to see every guest. The restaurant's interior remained just as refined, but the atmosphere had clearly become warmer. Mark Sampson was personally present at the opening. In a formal suit and his signature red Maga hat, he greeted the first guests, shaking hands and warmly welcoming each of them. The hall was lively. Customers discussed the new changes, bloggers filmed reports, and waitstaff bustled about, serving dishes. Among the staff in the updated uniforms, Lucas stood out. The former manager, now a rank-and-file waiter, looked different. His signature self-confidence had been replaced with a tense smile, and his gaze was full of caution. When one of the guests, a solid middle-aged man in a business suit, recognized Lucas, he couldn't resist asking, "Are you the manager who kicked out a customer because of their political views?" Lucas blushed but kept his composure. He replied as evenly as possible, "Yes, sir. I've realized my mistakes and am trying to improve." At that moment, Mark approached the table. He put a hand on Lucas's shoulder, throwing him a glance full of irony. "Exactly. Lucas is undergoing retraining. Now he's learning how to create a cozy atmosphere for every guest," he said with a smile, then added, "Right, Lucas?" Lucas nodded, his strained smile softening slightly. "Of course, sir." The guest smiled in satisfaction, and Mark, with a light gesture, moved on to the next table to greet more customers. Fame for the Gourmet for All quickly spread through the city. The restaurant's new approach became an example for other establishments, and Lucas's story a reason for discussion. Videos of the incident and its aftermath gained millions of views, attracting a stream of visitors eager to personally see the restaurant and try its food. That evening, with the restaurant filled to capacity, Mark stood by the window with a glass of wine, watching the lively atmosphere. His gaze rested on Lucas, who, despite his visible nervousness, tried his best to do his job. One of the journalists approached Mark with a question. "Mr. Sampson, how would you assess the success of the restaurant after changing its name and policies?" Mark smiled. His expression remained calm. "It was the right decision. A restaurant should unite people, not divide them." "But tell me honestly, aren't you afraid your hat might provoke conflicts again?" the journalist asked. Mark chuckled slightly and replied, "No. Now it's a symbol that change is possible if people are willing to learn." He raised his glass, watching the guests laugh and enjoy their evening. The restaurant's atmosphere radiated warmth and hospitality, while Mark, confidently wearing his Maga hat, embodied quiet strength. The restaurant thrived, reminding everyone that respect for people is the foundation of any success.